So, welcome to the first FitSit class of the new year. I'm sitting on a stool. It's perfectly fine to sit on a chair. But just as you're sitting on the chair, just take a moment to notice, if you can, how you're sitting. So, for example, are you tending to rest back into the back of the chair if you have one, meaning that the back is quite rounded? And then also just notice, are you tending, can you sense whether you're favouring one side? So I'm right-handed, I tend to favour my left. I say favour as I tend to keep my weight more on my left sit bone than the right. So just begin to notice that if you can. And then if you are sitting towards the back of the chair, could you please come to the front edge of the chair so that you're not resting into the back of the chair unless you need to. And I should say that because if you need to, then of course you stay resting comfortably. And then if you get a sense that you are a little bit rounded, one way just to address that is by pushing your lower tummy, a spot about 2 inches below the navel, pushing that forward. And can you see, if I do that, it just helps me to lengthen up through the spine. We're often so conditioned to keep this area pulled in that it can feel a little bit unusual to allow that area to push forward. But in fact, if you do that, it means that your back muscles begin to engage. Whereas if the tummy is pulled in all the time, they don't really stand a chance. So just coming to sit at the front edge of the chair, and just by way of a little warm-up really for the lesson, bring your attention to your right knee. So I'm going to mirror now the class. And then begin just to move your knee a little bit from one side to the other. So you're keeping the foot in contact with the floor, but just moving the knee a little bit from one side to the other. And as you're doing this, just see if you can notice how the pressure underneath the foot shifts to the little toe side of the foot and then to the big toe side of the foot. So just sensing there's a shift of weight going down into the big toe side and then to the little toe side. And we're achieving this shift of weight by a movement in the hip joint. Just by thinking of the knee going from side to side, we're bringing movement into the hip joint. And then pause, bring your attention to your left knee, and then begin just to move that knee a little bit from side to side. So again, just sensing how when the knee is to the inside, then there's more pressure to the big toe side of the foot. When the knee is to the outside, there's more pressure to the little toe side of the foot. And then pause, come to centre, and then bring your attention back to the right leg. And this time, can you think of lifting the big toe side of the foot and then putting it back down? So you keep the little toe side, you're lifting the big toe side and then pushing it back down. But this time, trying to keep the knee more or less still. So not the knee going from side to side, you're just trying to lift the big toe side and then putting it back down. And so it's more, we're shifting the pressure underneath the foot, but it's happening more from a movement in the ankle joint. And then pause, bring your attention to your left foot and your left leg, and then just see, can you lift and lower the big toe side of the foot, but just trying to keep the knee more or less still in space. So just lifting the big toe side and putting it down. And then pause, come back to the right leg, and this time can you lift first the big toe side of the foot and then the little toe side of the foot. So big toe side of the foot and then the little toe side of the foot, but again, if possible, keeping the knee more or less where it is in space. So most people find it easy to lift the big toe side, but not so accessible to lift the little toe side. So don't try and force it, just see what you can comfortably do. And then pause, and then do the same with the left foot. So you're lifting the big toe side of the foot and then the little toe side of the foot. And you'll perhaps feel that there's, although we're making the movement in the ankle, there's actually a little bit of movement going on in the lower leg. The lower leg is rotating in one direction and the other, and therefore there's movement in the knee too. Good. Now pause. Please bring your right foot just slightly forward of the left. I'm just showing that from the side, just slightly forward, and then lift the front of the foot, keeping the heel down. So you're just lifting the front of the foot and then putting it back down. And just notice, as you lift the foot, do your toes kind of, the foot want to go out to the side or to the inside? And if that is happening, can you think of just bringing the toes in the direction of the knee a few times? Good. And then pause when the foot is lifted, but keeping the heel down. And then think of making some circles in space with the big toe of the foot, as if you were just turning the dials of a clock that's resting on the floor in front of you. But this time, allow the knee to move freely. So just getting movement in the ankle, in the knee, and in the hip joint. And then reverse the direction of these circles. So just thinking of the big toe side of the foot leading the movement. And then pause and change feet around. So just bringing the left foot slightly forward. And first of all, just lifting the front of the foot and then putting it back down. Lifting and back down. And thinking of the toes coming straight towards the knee if possible. It is lifting and lowering. And then lift the foot, keep it lifted, keep the heel down, but so you're just lifting the front of the foot. And then imagine you're turning the dials of this imaginary clock with the big toe side of the foot and allowing the knee just to move in response to that. And of course you're perhaps feeling, there's some lovely movement going on in the hip joint too. And then reverse the direction of these circles, still thinking of the big toe side of the foot leading the way. Good. And then pause and come back to centre. So just by way of a test really, so many of you will have done this before, could you bring your weight onto one buttock or to one sit bone? So I'm deliberately not showing it first of all, but just say bring your weight over onto the right sit bone and then come back to centre, and then try it onto the other sit bone and then come back to centre. So and then once you've just done that, I'll just explain. So one way that you find quite commonly happens is that people bring their weight onto one side by tilting the spine, and sometimes, often they'll lift the other leg as a counterbalance, and then to bring the weight onto the other leg, onto the other side again, they'll do this kind of thing where they're tilting the whole of the spine and then come back. So I'll just show that with my teaching aid. So here's my pelvis and spine. So what people often do is they'll tilt the spine as a piece, as a rod really, lifting the other foot, and then to the other side they'll do this kind of thing. But you can perhaps see how that makes me quite unsteady. It means I'm prone to a fall. Whereas what we're trying to do, or learning to do in a more efficient way today, is to learn to side bend the spine from one side to the other. And you can see if we do it through side bending, it means I'm able to keep my head over a base of support as I go from one side to the other, whereas tilting means my head is suddenly out of the base of support. And the reason that's important is that people often, as they get older, they begin to walk through this kind of movement, through tilting from one side to the other. So please just come to the front edge of your chair again, and then bring your attention to your right sit bone, right buttock, and see, can you just lift and lower the right sit bone a few times. So just lifting and lowering a few times, just to see how easy or otherwise that is for you to do. And one way to help you to find that movement is to think, could you press down into the right foot, push the foot down into the floor to help you just lift the right side of the pelvis and then bring it back down. Another way you can think of this is if you're pouring the weight down into your left side and then coming back to centre. So just a few more times, lifting and lowering the right buttock. And just notice as you're doing this, so you might find that the head is still going to the side, but so just bear with it, lifting and lowering, good. And then pause and just take a rest. So mums are very familiar with this kind of movement, holding a baby on one side, and so it's that kind of movement in the pelvis, hitching up the hip. Now, please bring your right hand onto the top of the head. So the elbow is just pointing out to the side. And as you bring the hand onto the head, careful not to let the weight of the hand compress the spine. So keep the tummy pushing out and think it's actually your head that's coming up to meet the elbow. And then begin to do a movement of bringing the right elbow towards the right side of the pelvis and then come back. So just exploring this a number of times, bringing the right elbow towards the right side of the pelvis. So I'm deliberately saying towards the right side of the pelvis. It's not, careful you're not just doing this, taking the elbow to the floor. You see how that brings my head over to outside the base of support. So you think of the trajectory of the elbow going to the right side of the pelvis and then coming back. So just trying that a few more times. And you might want to bring your left hand just onto the ribs on the right hand side, just to give you some more information. Can you feel, as that elbow is coming down, these ribs on the right hand side, they're moving over to the left, but they're also shortening or coming together and then coming back. Just do a few more. See if you can feel how the weight is shifting onto the left buttock, how the right side of the pelvis is becoming light. Good. And then pause, just rest the arm down. And then once you've just had that brief rest, see if you can return to thinking of pressing down into the right foot so as to bring the weight onto the left hand side. And you might again just want to bring the left hand to the ribs on the right, just to see, can you feel, it's almost as if you're using the hand just to encourage the ribs to move over up towards the left and then come back. Pause and just have a rest. And then this time, please bring your attention to your ribs, to this part of the ribs, and think of your ribs just moving over to the left and then coming back to centre. So you're just thinking, literally your ribs, as if you're pushing them over to the left and then coming back to centre. So your ribs are just pushing over to the left and then coming back to centre. And notice as you take the ribs to the left how the right sit bone becomes light just as before. The ribs just moving to the left and then coming back, as if you're just trying to push something away with the ribs to the left and then coming back. Now, as you're moving the ribs to the left, see if you can just let the right ear tilt a little bit towards the right shoulder. So as the ribs go to the left, just letting the head tilt a little bit, the right ear towards the right shoulder. So again, just so you can feel how the spine is beginning to form that C shape that enables you to shift the weight over onto the left. Good. And then pause, just take a rest for a moment. And then bring your attention to your left shoulder, and think of your left shoulder moving to the left and slightly up, and then come back. So you think of the left shoulder going to the left and slightly up. So to the left and slightly up. But if you'll notice, I'm not doing this. I'm not lifting the shoulder away from the ribs. I'm just letting the shoulder rest on the rib cage. I'm just thinking of a direction really, that the shoulder is moving to the left and slightly up and then come back. So just a few more times. And as the shoulder goes to the left and slightly up, allow the right ear to tilt a little bit towards the right shoulder. So the shoulder to the left and slightly up and then come back. So another thing just to be careful of here is that you're not trying to do this, lead with the elbow. You see, if I lead with the elbow, automatically I begin to engage these muscles here. So the arm is just soft and you're just thinking of the shoulder moving to the left and slightly up. And you'll notice again, if you're managing to find this, how once again the ribs are moving to the left and then back, and how your right buttock is becoming light. And then pause and just take a rest for a moment. And then please bring your right hand onto the top of the head again. So again, don't let the hand compress the spine. You want to keep the tummy pushing out. And then just try again a few of these movements. So bring the elbow towards the side of the pelvis and then coming back. See if you can feel, if you're allowing it to, you can press into the foot as well, how the right buttock is becoming light and your weight is going down into the left sit bone. The ribs are moving over to the left, and how your left shoulder is going to the left and slightly up. So just seeing if you can feel that. In other words, your spine is doing this wonderful C shape to transfer the weight, and then pause and bring that hand to rest again on the thigh. And whilst that memory of that movement is strong, see if you can again just bring your attention to lifting the right side of the pelvis and lowering it. So the right side lifts to pour the weight down into the left sit bone. So just seeing if you can think of initiating this transference of weight from the pelvis, as if you're going to hold the baby, hold the baby on the right hand side, just hitching up the hip a little bit, that facilitates that transference of weight down into the left sit bone, and allowing the ribs to move to the left, and that left shoulder to go to the left and slightly up. And then now bring your attention to the movement of the ribs. So just for a few movements, think of the ribs moving to the left. Of course, you're letting the pelvis move, but thinking of initiating this from the ribs. And then do a few movements thinking of the shoulder going to the left and slightly up. But again, even though we're thinking of the shoulder, it's the same movement in the spine, and you're just letting that right hip just come a little bit closer to the right shoulder. And then just do a few movements alternating, thinking of the pelvis, the ribs, and then the shoulder. And then pause and take a rest for a moment. If you want to sit at the back edge of your chair, please take a rest at the back edge of the chair. So for those who are in the Feldenkrais class yesterday and who are coming tomorrow, you remember we were looking at a similar movement in lying, this ability to move from our centre, which so often as we get older becomes a little bit forgotten about or lost, that people will move from their limbs, keeping the trunk very held, whereas what we're trying to do is reactivate this possibility of transferring weight through our centre or our core. So please come back to the front edge of the chair if you're not there already, and then bring your attention this time to your left sit bone, and see, can you lift and lower the left sit bone. So you're just lifting and lowering, as if you just wanted to be able to slide a piece of paper underneath the buttock and then bringing it back down. And just notice, are you tending to kind of tilt? If so, can you perhaps make the movement smaller, pressing down into the foot to lift and lower the left side of the pelvis. And pause, bring your left hand onto the top of the head. So again, careful not to compress, it's just you're coming up to meet the hand. And then think of the left elbow coming towards the left side of the pelvis, and then come back. If you want to feel the difference, think of the elbow going towards the floor. You feel how suddenly your nervous system begins to kick in and wants to protect you, whereas then if you think of the elbow coming to the hip, you're actually shifting weight over onto the right hand side, because those ribs, you bring the hand onto the right hand onto the ribs. Can you feel how they're softening? They're coming closer together on the left hand side, and therefore the ribs on the right hand side are opening. Good. Now pause, just take a rest. And then once you've just had that brief rest, bring the attention to the ribs and think of the ribs moving over to the right and then coming back. So as they're an old-fashioned typewriter carriage, they're moving over to the right and then coming back. You think of the left ear, just allowing it to tilt a little bit towards the left shoulder as the ribs move to the right and back. And again, just see, as you're doing this, can you notice the shape of the spine? that's being made. So it's a C shape of the spine, side bending movement of the spine, just by thinking of the ribs going to the right and back to centre. And then pause, just take a rest for a moment. And then this time, bring your attention to your right shoulder and think of the right shoulder going to the right and slightly up, and then coming back. So the right shoulder going to the right and slightly up, and then coming back. You can think of the left ear just tilting a little bit towards the left shoulder as you do this. So the right shoulder to the right and slightly up. And as you're just ask yourself, so are you tending to try and lead by the elbow, which would be a lift of the arm? And what we're trying to do is just let the shoulder be nice and quiet as it moves to the right and slightly up. Again, just feeling how by thinking of that direction, it begins to pour the weight down into the right sit bone, but keeping the head and eyes more or less in the middle. And then pause, come to rest for a moment. And then once more, bring your left hand onto the top of the head. So the elbow is just kind of pointing out to the side. And then begin to think again of bringing the elbow towards the left side of the pelvis and then coming back. So elbow towards the left side of the pelvis. Can you feel what happens to the ribs again, then moving to the right? How your right shoulder is going to the right and slightly up. And there's this particular shape of the spine, this C shape, where one side is getting shorter and the other side is getting longer. And then pause and rest the hand. And then bring your attention back to the left side of the pelvis and think, can you lift and lower the left side of the pelvis a few times? So and as you lift the left side of the pelvis, you can think actually of the right side pressing down. So as if the pelvis was a bowl of water, you'd be pouring it down into the right sit bone, the weight of water into the right sit bone, and then coming back. And allowing the ribs, thinking of the ribs moving to the right as you do that. And then of the right shoulder going to the right and slightly up. Keeping the head more or less in the centre. So this is your ability to stand on one leg. That's it. Good. And then pause and come back to centre and just take a rest for a moment. And once you've had that brief rest, come back to the front edge of the chair and just come back to the question I asked you at the beginning of the class. Can you now bring your weight onto the right sit bone through a transference of weight and side bending? So that's a little bit easier. And then bring it over onto the left sit bone and then come back. Good. Now, once more, bring the weight onto the right sit bone and then come back. Now, as we do this a few times, particularly for those who have done this class before, how to refine this now, is we've been thinking of the shoulder and the ribs and the pelvis. That sometimes what happens is they'll side bend, but they're using the upper body to pull the pelvis over, which is fine. It's a way of achieving side bending, But now that we've sort of familiarised ourselves with the movement, can you really begin to think of initiating this from the pelvis, and then you come back. So not the shoulder pulling the pelvis, or the ribs pulling the pelvis. You're thinking, can you initiate this from the pelvis? You're still allowing the ribs to move, you're still allowing the shoulder to move, but you're really thinking, can you initiate this from the pelvis? And the reason for that is all your big, if you just pause and rest, all your big powerful muscles, your leg muscles, your gluteal muscles, the outer hip, the inner hip muscles, your stomach muscles, your back muscles, all those muscles attached to your pelvis. And so if you can initiate it, the movement from the pelvis, then you're much more working from your core. Good. Now pause, and then try that to the left hand side, so just a few times. So you think of lifting the right side of the pelvis to pour the weight down into the left side a few times, and again just noticing, are you tending to initiate it first with the shoulder or first with the ribs, and see then, can you initiate the movement from the pelvis? So just bringing the weight onto the left hand side. Good. Just a few more times. Good. And then pause. Let's take a rest. And then once more, bring your weight onto the right hand side. So, and see, can you just stay there? So left side of the pelvis is slightly light. You're balanced on your right sit bone, and just notice how, if you're managing to find this, the right side is long and your left side is shorter. The right shoulder is higher than the left, but you're able to keep the head more or less within your base of support. You can even try looking around yourself to do that, and then come back to center. And then see, can you go to the left, so you think of the initiating from the pelvis to bring the weight onto the left hand side, and just pause. Notice now the right side is shorter, the left side is longer, and your left shoulder is slightly higher than your right shoulder, and your head is still free to sort of scan the horizon to see what's coming towards you, and then come back. And then just see, can you go from side to side? So take your time to do this, and really just give yourself permission to get it wrong, but you're really seeing, can you initiate this transference of weight from the pelvis. So you're really trying to find the movement from the pelvis. Good. And then pause and just take a rest for a second. One of the reasons I love this lesson, I've kind of been fascinated with it for the past couple of weeks actually, is many of you know I have an old injury that affected my right hand side. So, and that means in standing, I tend to do this. I tend to stand on my left leg, and so whereas if I'm here, see how to shift the weight to one side and then the other, it's much more difficult for me to do that to the right hand side, but of course that's what you need to be able to do in walking. Can you see when I'm standing on my left leg, left side is, other side is shorter, one side is longer, one shoulder higher than the other. That's what we're practicing, the ability to improve our walking, not just our ability to move on the chair. So now, please bring yourself onto the right hand side and see, can you stay there and breathe, keeping the jaw nice and relaxed. And then bring your attention to your left knee, and can you move your left knee a little bit forward and a little bit back. So I'm not moving the foot is glued to the floor, but just moving the knee a little bit forward and back, but staying on the right buttock. I'll just show that from the side. So I bring my weight onto the one side, and I'm just moving the knee a little bit forward and a little bit back. So the sit bone, the left sit bone is sliding, pivoting a little bit forward and a little bit back. And you can see as I'm doing that, so I'm not trying to inhibit the movement of the shoulder, I'm just letting that respond to the movement of the knee going forward and back. Good. And then pause, come back to centre. And then let's just try that once again to the right hand side. So you pour the weight down into the right hand side. So you've allowed the ribs to adjust, the shoulder to adjust. And just see, can you move that knee a little bit forward and a little bit back. And you can feel how the pelvis, the left side of the pelvis is going forward and back. It's pushing the knee forward and pulling it back. Good. And then come back to centre. And then let's try that to the other side. So think of transferring your weight onto the left buttock or the left sit bone. Again, just pause there, make sure you're breathing, that you're not holding the jaw. And then just bring your attention to your right knee, and can you move the knee a little bit forward and a little bit back. Again, you'll notice how the right sit bone is light, it's sliding a little bit forward and back on the seat of the chair. You'll notice how the pelvis, the right side of the pelvis is coming forward and back, but we're still stable on the left hand side. Good. And then come back to centre. And let's just try that once more to the left. So you pour the weight down into the left side, trying to initiate that from the pelvis, keeping the head more or less in the middle, and then you think of that knee, the right knee, just sliding a little bit forward and a little bit back. So again, this is what we need to be able to do in walking, the pelvis, transferring the weight from one leg to the other. Good. And then pause and rest. So now, once you've just had that rest, see if you can bring your weight over onto the right hand side. So you can really, again, for those more advanced who have done this before, can you really begin now to think of initiating this from the pelvis, but still allowing the ribs and the shoulder to respond. And then slide this time your left knee back, and keep it back, and then bring your weight back onto the two sit bones. And then bring your weight back onto the right hand side, bring that knee forward, again back to where it came from, and then return to the two sit bones. So again, you think of initiating this from the pelvis to bring the weight onto the right hand side, slide the left knee back, keeping the foot in place, and then bring your weight into this slightly asymmetrical position, asymmetrical in that one knee is slightly forward of the other now, and then come back onto the right hand side, bring that knee forward, the left knee forward, and come back onto 2 sit bones. And then see, can you transfer the weight onto the left hand side, and then bring your right knee back, keep it slightly back. So in other words, we've shifted one side of the pelvis back, allow the weight to come onto the 2 sit bones, and then pour the weight back down into the left sit bone, bring that knee forward and come back onto 2 sit bones. Let's do that once more. So again, you think of transferring the weight down into the left sit bone, bring the right knee straight back, allow the weight to come onto the 2 sit bones, and then you think of pouring the weight back into the left, bringing that knee forward and coming back to the 2 sit bones. So are you managing to keep the head floating in the middle? And now let's be a little bit more ambitious. So come on to the right hand side. So you pour the weight down into the right sit bone. Slide your left knee back about an inch. Bring the weight back onto 2 sit bones, and then come straight over onto the left hand side. So you pour the weight onto the left hand side, slide the right knee back, keep it slightly back, bring the weight onto 2 sit bones, and then we'll keep going. So you bring the weight onto the right, let the left knee go back, keep it back, bring the weight onto 2 sit bones, and I think I've got enough space to do one more on my stool. So I bring my weight onto the left side, pouring, slide the right knee back, come back to 2 sit bones, and then suddenly I'm at the back of my chair. So practicing our walking, our standing balance on a chair. That's why I love these lessons. So once we're back at the chair, just have a brief rest, and then we'll see, can we use these skills to come forward again. So bring your weight onto the left sit bone. So again, can you initiate this from the pelvis, letting the ribs move, the shoulders to respond. Slide your right knee forward, keep it forward. That's brought the right side of the pelvis forward. Transfer the weight onto both sit bones. Think of pouring the weight down into the right sit bone. Bring the left knee forward. Come onto 2 sit bones. And you go over onto the left sit bone. Bring the right knee forward and come back onto 2 sit bones. And then suddenly I'm towards the front edge of my chair again. That's it. So let's just make that journey one more time together. So bring the weight onto the right hand side. So again, just pause there. Notice, are you allowing the ribs to have softened to the right shoulder is slightly higher than the left, not because we're lifting it, but because we've made this movement in the spine. Bring your left knee back, and then allow the pelvis to bring you back onto 2 sit bones. Go over onto the left hand side, keeping the head more or less in the middle. Slide the right knee back, I should say. Bring the weight onto 2 sit bones. Pour the weight down into the right hand side. Slide the left knee back. Come onto 2 sit bones, and then keep going to the back edge of your chair or stool. So my feet haven't moved at all, and then we'll come forward again. So bring the weight onto the right in the way that we've been looking. Bring the left knee forward. Transfer the weight onto 2 sit bones. Come forward with the right knee. Come to 2. and then forward. Good. And forward. So, and then just in your own time, see if you can make that journey back. But so again, you're trying to avoid this kind of thing. That's it, you're transferring weight through the pelvis and the spine to come forward and backwards on the seat of your chair. Good. Now, pause, and then just come back again to the question, the test question I asked you at the beginning of the class. Now, if you were to bring the weight onto the right sit bone, is that fairly easy for you to do through this weight transference? And then feel the difference between that and this kind of thing. Can you feel this? Suddenly your system's in protective mode, because otherwise if I don't protect myself I'm going to fall over because my head is outside the base of support, and this ability to transfer weight. Now, pause. If you are able to, please come to stand. If you need to hold on to a chair, that's absolutely fine. That's fine. I just wanted to just to explore. So here I am on my two legs. Can you see? So now, if I to bring my weight onto my left leg, I'm mirroring again. Again, I'm trying to initiate this from the pelvis, from side to side. So again, it's that same idea that we've been looking at in sitting, of pouring the weight down. See how when I come onto that leg I can lift the other foot, but I'm standing on that leg, and standing on my one side is longer, the other side is shorter, one shoulder is higher than the other, and then to come back, again, I'm trying to initiate this through my pelvis. And you'll know, I'm sure you'll see a lot of people, they walk in a way where the pelvis isn't transferring weight for them, that they're trying to do it through the shoulders or through swinging the head around. So it can just be a very good practice to have while you're waiting for the kettle to boil. Can you bring the weight onto one leg and then the other in a way that you're standing on the leg, rather than trying to balance on it in another way, so the leg and the pelvis support you in your walking. So please just come and have a rest on the chair. So covered a lot of ground today, and hopefully given you something to think about, even when sitting in a chair, how you can be working on your walking and balance. This is really, I think, the kind of foundational skill for all the other movements we'll be exploring in the weeks to come. Thank you very much.